Hello everyone, welcome to Curators Talk. My name is Stephanie Rose, Curatorial Assistant here at the Institute of Jamaica, Museums of History and Ethnography Division. And today I'll be interviewing Mr. David Stimpson, or Curator of the Museums Division. How are you, David?
I'm fine, thanks.
It's wonderful, wonderful. Okay, tell me a little bit about yourself, your experience, a little bit about your background and when you started curating.
I came to the Institute in 2000 after having studied in Ghana, and the first few exhibitions I did were really looking at music and the cultural manifestations behind it. In Ghana, I had done a master's degree looking at African studies and focusing on a particular group of people. One of the traditions that I found there that I ended up studying and doing research on was the fantasy coffin, what has become known as the fantasy coffin.
It's wonderful. Now, a lot of people, have this perception that Africa is really underdeveloped, Africa is tribal, and there are certain myths associated with that. Now, based on your experience, how would you, or tell us a little bit of some of those myths, and how would you dispel those myths based on your experience?
Well, really looking at the exhibition, People of the Worlds, the idea behind it was to use African objects to show, one, how the Institute has collected over a 100-year trajectory. Also to show some of the objects and how those tend to reinforce the stereotypes. And from those stereotypes, look at what is missing in the Institute's collection and how it programs its collection. The fancy coffin represents the life of any individual who dies, and it's coming from a background where coffins didn't exist in Ghana. The tradition among this group was to bury wrapped in linen and to be buried in the house. Now, fancy coffins came about in the 50s or in the 40s in Ghana with the advent of coffins in the sort of conventional sense, and then making a play of them to memorialize the lives of individuals. So they might come in the form of a canoe. If you were a farmer, maybe some plant, tomato, or the various forms, innumerable forms that they are able to construct. And this is something that is more contemporary, a development of the Ghanaian African experience of colonialism and into post-colony. What we're really looking at is a transition from culture into colony and colonial intervention, and then in the modern industrial age, how those cultures are able to develop themselves.
Okay.
And in Jamaica, you see that in many ways. In religion, it is, if you think of revival and how it has been moved with the advent of electronic media, gospel, Pentecostal movement. These are transitions that are being made into contemporary acceptance,
Okay.
moving from a revival route that in many ways is seen as being backward.
I take it that these are some of your favorite pieces from the exhibition. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about them, starting with the Arari board game here?
Well, I have spoken about the fantasy coffin and its use as a burial form, and what it represents. The Wari is a very traditional African game, possibly going back to the Arab invasion of northern Africa into West Africa and along the east coast of Africa, but it might predate that 700 AD period. And it is akin, and I'm using it because it's akin to how we play dominoes or cards. It is a venue for people to socialize around, but it also exercises the mind in many ways. So it also, the same sort of tradition of having something that is used in multiple ways is being shown.
Absolutely. Okay. And I noticed you have a picture here. Would you like to tell us a little bit more?
Well, this photograph is one of the collection as it was presented in probably the 1920s of the Natural History Museum. And at the time, the organization of museums was less specific than it is now. And in the exhibition, this and other photographs were showing how objects were presented to the public. And in the setting, we also describe how the setting that you stage for objects is significant to how people are going to understand them and perceive them.
Okay. Well, in terms of this exhibition, and in terms of my job capacity, one of the things I do, right, is to tour hundreds of school children who come through here, and I have to tell them about the exhibition. And one of the things, as you said, this exhibition aimed to do was try to dispel some of the myths about Africa. When you were in the initial stages of creating this exhibition, tell me specifically what the aims and the objectives were. What is it you wanted people to know about Africa, and what is it you wanted to bring across to the students?
It wasn't so much what I wanted people to know about Africa. Of course, we're using African objects, so that will come in. But it's really to reflect on how Africa, through the objects and how we view Africa, is a reflection of how we view ourselves and our own history. Often we think of culture in a sort of historic mode, and the same is true in museums. Many museums are seen as sort of things of the past, but more and more the contemporary is becoming more important as the cycle of human development increases. What is happening now is people want to know what is happening now. So the exhibit was really an attempt to throw on the African collection way of seeing ourselves. And the idea was, again, to show how the collection and how we collect needs to be improved, needs to be updated.
Wonderful. Now you made mention of the contemporary. Now, as a museum, in terms of how we collect, do you think that we are trying to change our policy in terms of how we're collecting, moving away from collecting in terms of a tribal sense into a more contemporary sense? Not totally giving away or putting away the past, but more because you said that people are more interested in knowing about what's happening today, and societies have definitely changed, such as Africa, right? So I'm just saying to you, are we moving as a museum, right? Are we moving to that direction today?
Well, I think the museum must create itself, and when I say that, it is really the people within it and their understanding of how the museum can operate as a place of learning through objects. Now, the important of the object is that the object itself is able to maintain a truth that doesn't tangibly change with time. So it gives you recourse to an origin, and out of that origin you can develop many different ideas. And it is really this that the museum, I think, wants to try to do.
Yeah.
But it can only do this if it has a collection that is full enough to support these changes. If the collection tends to remain a historic collection, then the difficulty is how to translate that and make it interesting and appealing to people growing up today.
Absolutely. Our people of the world, do you think we achieved our goal?
Well, the exhibition was, I guess it was a difficult one that put the onus on you as a curatorial assistant to try to explain many of the ideas so that, especially for younger children, they could not only look at the object, but to get a sense of what the grouping of different objects was trying to do. So you better would tell me if that objective was achieved.
I think we achieved some objectives. Most importantly, some of the students, after seeing the audio visuals that we had incorporated in this exhibition, they were very fascinated because initially sometimes I'll ask them, what you think of Africa, and they'll tell me, how many people on the streets. Africa have houses with thatched roofing and things like that. And when I show them the video, I get this different sense. I get this new perspective, like, wow, Africa really looks like Jamaica. Certain parts of Africa really looks like Jamaica. And they leave the exhibition having this different perspective of Africa not being so underdeveloped anymore, but Africa being changed in
Well, I hope that was the case because it was also part of the idea to give people a broader sense of contemporary Africa.
Absolutely. Okay, so there you have it. Interview with Mr. David Stimpson, curator of the Museums of History and Ethnography Division.